What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Eclectic Beard. This go around, we'll be looking at America is not Europe, which I could have told you that, but let's see what this video is talking about. Let's get into it.
I was born and grew up in Denmark, and these are countries where the government spends taxes and spends approximately twice the level of the United States. Mm-hmm. And while I am very sympathetic to many of your spending proposals, especially on the things you mentioned on early childhood and single payer and the like, I also know that these are countries that heavily tax everybody, not just the rich people. Middle classes, they have consumption taxes on everything of 20%. So while I'm very sympathetic to what you say, my sense is still that you would like to spend as a Scandinavian, but not tax as one. Is that correct?
We have, the answer is, and you raised some very good points.
Comparing the U.S. with Europe and countries in Europe.
Okay, so I'm interested because Bernie Sanders was a big, the Democrats screwed him out of the Democrat nomination in 2016 whenever he was running, whenever him, Hillary, Ted Cruz, who was also on stage and pictured there along with him, and Donald Trump all run. Bernie Sanders was stolen from him. That election for the Democrats was stolen from him and given to Hillary Clinton because she was the brand name of the party. The problem was that everybody hated that brand by that time because we've heard about the Clintons for 20 years and not all of it good or trustworthy or anything, and a lot of it just yuck. So, and this is coming off the heels of Benghazi and emails disappearing and all kinds of stuff. So the American trust in her, the public trust in her was, and Bernie took in the states that were mattering. He was winning in the polls, but they were giving her the super delegates, and they screwed him over, which is the reason why Hillary did not win at all. It's the reason why everybody's like, oh, Donald Trump, he didn't even win the popular vote. No, because he won 3 times the amount of counties across the U.S. as what she did. She won California, she won New York, and she won, I think, I want to take and say New Mexico, maybe? She didn't win a whole lot of places at all. Especially not where it mattered. She won the 2 largest states outside of Texas, but she lost Texas and Alaska. She won Oregon and Washington, which don't carry a whole lot. That's one of the great things about our electoral system that people don't get. She won the popular vote, but he won 3 times as many counties and won more states overall. So we're going to have somebody that won 6, 7 states taken because they won the popular vote be the president? No. Nope. Because their interests aren't going to line up with mainstream American. They're at the mom and pop store and in the cornfields, whose policies that will affect. Even though Trump should have never been the nominee, and I don't know how anybody voted for Trump. It's the reason why in the last 3 elections nationally I voted third party. Just they give us these ick politicians. But this, and starting with Bernie Sanders, just got me interested.
Would be naive, oversimplistic, and offend a bunch of people. Land masses are complex. But I'm going to go ahead and compare them anyways, because some of the comparisons between Europe and the US remain way too superficial.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
And he proceeded to raise
It's not
taxes
uncommon to
and lost the
obsess
election.
over the usual suspects for why the US is less equal than Europe and also has less good quality, affordable social programs. The analysis is simple. The US has more billionaires and taxes them less. Europe has less billionaires but taxes them more. Need a larger tax base to fund popular social programs and also less inequality? Just raise the taxes on the rich, like the Europeans do. Now, Although the tax rates for rich people explain some part of the difference, it doesn't explain enough. Europeans can afford good social programs because a lot of Europeans pay a lot for them, mainly through indirect taxes. And Europeans are also more equal before taxes even factored in because a lot of the social programs they pay more for also reduce pre-tax inequality. But the US has, so far, been unable to adopt the same. Why? Well, in part because taxing the wealthiest of society is easier to advertise and justify than taxing everybody a lot more. In Europe, most people don't really need to be convinced about paying for their welfare states because it works sufficiently for most of them. But in the US, there's an intimate struggle with deciding whether pre-distribution will be a state, local, or federal solution. Part of the reason is that in the US, the federal government gets the most media attention, while state and local governments can avoid scrutiny. This means that minimum wage hikes in the US are practically always seen as a responsibility for the federal government, which has to delicately balance different costs of living, like laborers living in New York City and miners living in West Virginia. In Europe, though, a country like France or Denmark can opt for different geographically sensitive policy while also being held more directly into account because the assignment of responsibility is clearer to its citizens.
There's this definition of a wicked problem, which is circulating around in the literature, which suggests that a wicked problem is wicked if it has so many dimensions to it that you can't go at one angle to the problem and try to fix it. And I think school finance is like that. So school districts get money from their local communities in the form of property taxes. They'll also get money from the state, and the state might give them money through multiple formulas. And then a portion, a much smaller portion, about 9 or 10%, comes from the federal government. So even if you tried to solve the problem at, say, the state level, there are these other funding sources that come with their own restrictions, which ultimately affect how the money gets used in schools.
In Connecticut, a U.S. state, a school in Bridgeport will be poorer by virtue of being surrounded by poor properties, while a school in Greenwich will be richer because it is surrounded by richer properties. This is because local taxes are largely funded by property values in the area. However, this concept fails to explain everything. Educational disparities also exist across Europe and within its countries. The US is not unique for having a system that predisposes poor children to poorer resources. Education systems are complex. Finland is not the same as Sweden, and resources invested in education and the quality that follows does not seem like a linear relationship. The US's unique situation is that its quality does not match the amount that the US actually spends on it. One of the...
Yeah, that's... Okay, This is, so far, I like this video. So far, just a base explanation for stuff and showing the differences between how stuff is working here in the U.S. and the responsibilities that citizens and government taking how stuff is viewed versus how stuff is viewed for the systems over in Europe. And it's well done. This right here on the education, we spend more per capita per student, I think, just about anywhere else in the world, and our education is still in the tank. The problem being it's not only with financing being part of the issue, but it's also you've got different. Every year students have a standardized test, but that standardized test just tests to make sure they're on grade level for things like math, language, spelling, things of that. But that's it, and science. But that's it. It's just making sure they're at grade level. There's no standardized testing to make sure that they're learning the same things at the same rate with a unified school system. That's not the case whatsoever for our public schools. So what's taught in New York might not be taught over in California, and what's taught in California is not going to be taught in Alabama. What's taught in Alabama is not being taught in South Dakota. What's taught in South Dakota is not being taught in Ohio, not in the same way. Sometimes not either stuff is left out, or sometimes it just doesn't go into in depth, or so that's also, I think, part of the issue with the U.S. is we don't have a standardized form of education.
The problems with answering why resources don't match the quality you would expect in the US is because the decentralized nature of school districts makes it pretty difficult to actually identify what spending works and what doesn't. Overall, there are some indications that, compared with Europe, the amount of staffing, the associated health and retirement benefits, alongside transportation, all add up to more cost for the American education system. But the differences don't end there.
In the 1990s, as the crime rate was plummeting, as American life was getting safer and safer, Americans freaked out and thought that if they take their eyes off their children, the children will be abducted. Now, this goes back, the fear was stoked by cable TV in the 1980s. There were a few high-profile abductions. But it's not until the 1990s that we really start locking kids up and saying, you cannot be outside until you're 14 or 15. We took this...
Bro, what happened with that? I was whatever the 90s hit, I was 8 years old. I'd be locked out in the house and have to drink out the damn water hose. The problem is the people who were teens or in their early 20s and took and seen the stuff in the 80s like that, by the time they got in the 90s, they had kids of their own, and they remembered that still fresh in their mind. Well, the parenting, I think, kind of reflected that. And it doesn't help that you had, like, all this, the proliferation of cable and the programming being there being a lot more options than there was previously when in the 80s and the 70s when they were growing up. So, yeah, that's, I remember drinking out the water hose, taking being outside from about 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning to about 6 o'clock in the evening. And that was just to get dinner and go right back outside until about 8 or 9, because it didn't start getting dark till about 9, and come back in the house about 8:30, take a shower, lay down and go to bed. Like, must have started happening around the mid-90s. Late 90s, I should say.
And saying, you cannot be outside until you're 14 or 15. We took this essential period of childhood from about 8 to 12, when kids throughout history have practiced independence, have gotten into adventures, have made rafts and floated down the Mississippi River. We took that period and said, you don't get to practice independence until it's too late, until that period is over.
Kids in the US are raised differently than kids in Europe. Some blame the planning that produced more isolated American families, some the over-paranoia towards kidnapping in the 1980s, and others point to an increasingly competitive environment where parents try to give their children an edge over the others by...
I will say this, and I hate to stop it this soon after the last stop, but it's funny, they're showing the milk carton with a picture on the back. That's something, as a kid in the 90s, I gotta say, that's something I do remember vividly, because now even making the joke, I'll take a joke with friends or even my kids. Man, you're so ugly. You go missing. They're not putting your picture on the back of the milk carton. Like, you'd scare somebody at breakfast time. Jokingly, but some people don't get that reference of the picture on the milk carton, because they used to put pictures of missing kids on milk cartons. And so what they're saying, as far as it makes sense. It's, wow, I'm getting old. Because Jesus Christ. But that's something you don't see anymore, is the pictures on the milk cartons.
Helicoptering them. It's really not that far a stretch to say that many European children could be considered to have more freedom at an earlier age. American children are less likely to be able to walk to school alone compared with European children, which you can of course connect to overall crime rates, and authoritative school policy is still much more accepted across the US than it is in Europe.
So, the real key to the distinctiveness of America is the structure of our government. One part of it, of course, is the independence of the judiciary. But there's a lot more. There are very few countries in the world, for example, that have a bicameral legislature. Oh, England has a House of Lords for the time being, but the House of Lords has no substantial power. They can just make the Commons pass a bill a second time. France has a Senate, it's honorific. Italy has a Senate, it's honorific. Very few countries have two separate bodies in the legislature equally powerful. That's a lot of trouble, as you gentlemen doubtless know, to get the same language through two different bodies elected in a different fashion. Very few countries in the world have a separately elected chief executive. Sometimes I go to Europe to talk about separation of powers. And when I get there, I find that all I'm talking about is independence of the judiciary. Because the Europeans don't even try to divide the two political powers, the two political branches, the legislature and the chief executive. In all of the parliamentary countries, the chief executive is the creature of the legislature. There's never any disagreement between them and the prime minister, as there is sometimes between you and the president. When there's a disagreement, they just kick him out. They have a no confidence vote, a new election, and they get a prime minister who agrees with the legislature. And, the Europeans...
The difference is simple. European countries are mainly nations, not federations. A European state, if it existed, could never be the same as the US. Written in their constitution, US states are modeled after the federal government, and state governments, which mirror the one above, usually have their own Chamber of Representatives, a Senate, and also have an executive mirrored after their president. In Europe, if there was any state that was above the countries that made it up, it would have to be modeled from those very different countries beneath it, rather than serving as a model for the countries below it. This is an important difference.
It's funny that they made that distinction and they took and showed that clip, because one of the things I often get in the comments section is, I don't understand how, this happens or this happens or this happens. And it's because you've got, at the local level, you've got your city council. Some places, in a lot of places, you've got city council and you've got county council, and city council can pass ordinances and county council can pass ordinances, and they can also cancel each other out at times, but you've got that. And then at the state level, you've got the House of Representatives and you got the Senate. We've got state senators and state representatives. And then you take and go to the federal level, and you got senators and congressmen and women, and you've got representatives. So you've got these checks and balances to where something will be presented in one spot, and then it's changed as it passes through that body. It gets to the next one. It has to be changed for people that are within that legislative body to agree to it, to then pass it themselves. And if the president doesn't like it, it gets kicked back. And if if there's a majority, they're like, yeah, no, we don't care that you don't like it, we're passing it anyways. They override the president. So they're like, yeah, whatever. And it's happened numerous times. And it's done like that at state levels, and it's done like that at local levels, which local levels, a lot of times, I say, the city council, a lot of times, and the county council, a lot of times they work in conjunction with each other. I'm trying to think. I don't really remember any times where I've seen the county council be like, no, you can't do that. City council, but they both take and pass stuff so you get. It's a massive process here that just. And it varies from state to state to state to state, because more than the federal government has, its power has a limit. And whatever is not given to them within the Constitution and legislative writings that have come since then is the state. The state has the power. And for whatever is not given, whatever powers are not left to them after the federal government, it's the people and the locals. So that's the reason why things are seem so jacked up. It's because of our process here to ensure that more than the federal and state government, personal liberties pretty much rule the day. So
because it means that any kind of European government would have to balance parliamentary systems with presidential republics, federal states with unitary ones, and they'll be expected to create a system that hopefully pleases each one sufficiently. All in all, although the differences between the two are practically endless and somewhere near impossible to actually describe, it's still a worthwhile effort to try and figure a few out and also discuss them. In some way, Europe has more breathing room to understand what it wants to be, which is no easy task, because whatever you think Europe is, it can still look across the Atlantic and realize what it definitely is not.
Jesus. Sugary bread, I love that. Amount of polarization. Yes, our politics are completely polarized. So there we have it. America is not Europe. Pretty good breakdown and explanation, just at a basic level, on differences and why things are different, especially when it comes to not only the welfare state of things, but also as far as like education and how the correlation between how our system is set up versus how it's set up and things are viewed in Europe. I like this. I think this is a really good job. Take a look at some more stuff like this. I love looking at stuff like this because it shows dichotomy and a lot of times I try to as best to take and fill in also the cultural mindset here as opposed to over there, because there's still a lot of people here. I myself, you want to take and tax me some more, you tax the rich a lot more, and and get it to where there's a better social fallback plan. By all means, do so, because people, there's no reason why it should cost somebody $125, $150, $180 a week to cover their family with health insurance, and then on top of that take and pay $5,000 to $7,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 as a deductible before the insurance fully covers the cost of medical care. And on top of that, because these people have insurance, it should be covering these full $60,000, $70,000 bills that after the insurance covers their portion, you still have $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 that you're left to owe if you haven't paid your deductible at that point. It's stupidity. Why? You have that in case shit happens, basically. You have that in case you get sick or you get injured. And the thing that gets me is people like, oh yeah, but the waiting list in places like Europe, and let me tell you something. My kids, we have the insurance on our kids. We've got insurance for my kids to get seen. We're talking the last time we called to get them set up because they were sick. We wanted to make sure it wasn't COVID. We had a 4-month wait. And we've had a 3 to 4 month wait anytime we've wanted to take the kids to the doctor to take and get checkups and stuff like that. 3 to 4 month wait. And it's been like that for years. My wife has dental insurance. Had a broken tooth. If she sets the appointment, she's waiting 2 to 3 months. I know people who have insurance that they're still waiting. Like a lot of times, whatever's ailing them, they'll wait 2 or 3, 4 months, and they finally go get seen, and it's cancer. And then, oh yeah, of course, everything pumps into gear because it's cancer. But that's 4 months they can't get back that we don't know how that grew. And this is with insurance. So what's the problem with having socialized healthcare? If you're having insurance, you still got there's a waiting list. There's no difference. The only difference is you're paying more out of pocket. Like that's some of the mindsets of people here I don't understand. I'd rather take and pay more in taxes to make sure that it's everything, that everybody is covered. And if you want health insurance, well, that's still an option, but you're covered regardless. I'd rather have to pay some more money to make sure that's the case, because at this point it's broken. It's just broken. I hope you all enjoyed this. I'm sorry for the little rant, but I hope you all enjoyed this. Y'all be good to each other. Love yourselves. Peace.